want to get Capone. I don't know how to get him.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way.
The city of Chicago has long had a reputation for doing things in a very specific and what some might call interesting manner when it comes to law enforcement. While the Untouchables revealed a very Hollywood version of that ideal, in essence, it's not far at all from what some say is the truth here in 2015. Sometimes in order to do the job, cops get their hands dirty. Every member of law enforcement knows this. But what has been uncovered in the Windy City is at a level few believe still existed, and many would like to deny is anything but standard procedure. Our guest is a former police officer in Atlanta, Georgia, assistant chief counsel with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, currently a principal in the Washington, D.C. law firm, the Harrold firm. Marc Harrold joins us again on the show. Marc, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks.
Marc, this is interesting because this came out of The Guardian, a United Kingdom website and newspaper, talking about a secret interrogation facility. And they're talking here about keeping arrestees out of official booking databases, shackling them for prolonged periods of time, beating by police resulting in head wounds. First of all, before we even get to what happens around American law enforcement, are you surprised at all to hear that in 2015 there is a building like this that is being used in a major city?
Well, I have to admit I was surprised. When I first saw this story, it's one of the, I saw it on The Guardian, and then I looked for corroborating sources. But then they started going with some defense counsel and some other people in the know there in Chicago, and it does seem that it exists. And I was surprised initially, but when I really think about it, we've seen the line between the intelligence community, the military, and federal police has been diminished post 9/11, and now we're looking at a diminished line between, looks like, state and local law enforcement and terrorism and intelligence. And these lines are there for a reason as to what individuals can do abroad versus what they can do here at home.
What would be the reason? Now, and again, I may just be asking a rhetorical question here. I get that. But what would be the reason? You have jails, you have facilities, you have cops, you have ways to deal with them. What would be the reason to have something, a black site they're calling it, where you would shackle people, deny them access to any sort of legal counsel whatsoever? And we're talking about kids as young as 15 years of age, allegedly.
Well, I don't think there's a good reason. The procedures, the booking procedures, the Miranda warnings, all of these steps that are taken when you're arrested, which are very predictable steps, and you should be going through predictable steps so your counsel knows where you are, they can get to you. So, you know, all of those steps, those are the procedures that really make up due process. What's the reason for this? Again, I don't think there's a legitimate reason. The reason may be that some individuals believe, and I think in the intro you alluded to this, and maybe the Untouchables quote is sort of like this idea that at some point there are threats and the means justify the ends justify the means. The problem with that is, as we know, when you erode civil liberties from within, at some point what you're trying to protect, you've lost. In other words, if you go ahead because of a threat and erode civil liberties on our own, we basically relinquish rights, then we don't have the same country at the end, and that's pretty much the goal of the terrorists to begin with. So I understand people that think we need these extreme measures in extreme times, but we have to be vigilant to guard our civil rights, or what we're trying to protect will be lost.
All right, now let's take another side of this, because this is in Chicago, where crime has been out of control for so long. They are having children shooting children, people dying on the streets. It's almost as if sometimes it is like a bloody Western scene sometimes from the early 1800s. Let's just take it from the example. There are people who are going to fire back and say, all right, we get this, but this is what we need to do. Crime has gotten to a point where we can't control it anymore. These kids, these adults, they have weapons sometimes that are more powerful than we have. We have got to do something. So how dare you tell us what we need to do in order to keep the public safe? You know that there's going to be a snapback like that, at least maybe not publicly, but it's going to come privately, right?
Well, I personally worry a little bit about the militarization of police, what they call the militarization of police. But I think those arguments about what needs to be done, in other words, if you have threats on the street, if you feel the cops are outgunned, then you need more cops. You may need more visibility. You may need special units, specialized units like SWAT. In other words, those things that you're worried about on the street, those are preventative measures, and that goes to how people are arrested. That goes to the force that may be needed to defend the police officers and the citizens to quell that violence. But I don't see those as good reasons to change the post-arrest procedures and the protections that accused have. In other words, I can understand, like we saw in the 1994 bank robbery in Los Angeles, where all of a sudden they said, look, these guys had Kevlar, they had automatic weapons, these LAPD cops couldn't deal with this, and they changed their procedures. I can understand if you feel like you have a war zone, taking certain measures to arm the cops, to get more cops, to have specially trained cops, whatever you need to do. But hiding people away from their counsel and depriving them of post-arrest due process, I don't see how that works towards that goal.
Mark, should we be concerned that it's not only in Chicago, but it's in other major cities around America, that this is SOP for some people and some law enforcements?
Well, I can say I policed with the city of Atlanta long before 9/11. Well, not long before, but before 9/11. And I can say that I never, a lot of times people will say, well, you've probably seen something like that. I really never did see anything like this. And city of Atlanta is a pretty major city. But the idea that Chicago is completely isolated, that they're the only ones doing this, that could be the case. But of course, at this point, because we know that one major city is doing this, you know, city councils, politicians, and community leaders around the country need to ask, is our city doing this? You know, is this just the tip of the iceberg, or is this one city that has a mentality that the ends justify the means and this needs to be shut down and you move on from there? I honestly don't know. I had never heard of this, and like I said, when I first read the report, I really was surprised. I looked for some other source because I thought this was just, you know, some report that would be, you know, found not to be credible in the end. I mean, the almost Gestapo tactics that I'm reading about now, I do find those hard to believe, even from coming from a law enforcement background.
Mark, less than a minute to go here. Are we looking at a time when we now have to once again look inward at law enforcement and say that there are members of law enforcement, not everybody, but there are those who are what I call the bullet heads, and there are those who enjoy this. There are those who actually revel in this kind of violence, and we have got to ferret them out. We've got to root them out and get them out with extreme prejudice.
Well, we absolutely do. You know, law enforcement should be looking to enforce all the laws, I guess, and civil liberties are found as constitutional laws. They're sort of super laws. They should be looking to affirmatively protect those the same way they are property and people. But absolutely, you know, when you get a new partner on the police force and the first thing they tell you is, I've always wanted to be a cop, that can be really good. It's somebody who's really dedicated to service. But there are those individuals who become law enforcement officers and all types of careers, but law enforcement officers for the wrong reasons too. And of course, they needed to be weeded out because they're not fit to do the job.
The city of Chicago, under Mayor Rahm Emanuel, certainly has some things to answer for as this report starts to make its rounds. Mark, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, take care. From the world of politics and broadcast media, grown and allegedly intelligent adults who still have yet to learn a simple lesson that any 5-year-old could understand here in the social media world. We'll get to that and more when we continue right here on MidPoint.